It's a little bit more friendly. Okay, so today we have Glen Walton joining us from Playables. I always get it wrong. Which Playables? Streets, not City.
Yeah, different place.
So the reason I'm holding my laptop is I'm never going to remember the amount of things that you described yourself as. A performer, a writer, a theatre maker, a visual artist, a musician, an interaction designer, and a digital instrument maker.
Yeah, a bit over the top, isn't it?
Yeah. Many, many talents. So today Glen is going to talk about the work of Playable Streets, which is the digital arts company that he is artistic director of. So I won't say too much and I'll let him kind of talk about their work.
Sure.
So if everyone would like to join me in welcoming you today.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. It's awesome to be here. This place is great. First time seeing it and I'm already full of wonder. So I'm just going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, probably very rambling and all over the place. Feel free to have questions at the end, but also if you want to interrupt me during the talk, that's fine too. Heckling is also fine. I'm used to it. So I'm going to talk about Playable Streets, but to put that in context and also to talk about the way I approach making work, I'll start with where my background is, which is in theatre and music and comedy. I spent a few years dressed as a zombie wombat in a theatre show called Zombatland that toured around the place, and we sort of made this. It's a company called the Suitcase Royale, and we made this stupid film noir Monty Python comedy theatre. We started at university at Deakin in 2004, and we worked for about 12 years in that company, traveling around doing stupid theatre. And then I also work with a company called Polyglot, who's an awesome experience theatre installation company. And this is one of their works called Paper Planet. I think this was from a China season in Shanghai, where kids just come in and build stuff out of paper and cardboard, and they populate this forest over like a week or 2 weeks. And I was the musician in that, and I created this sort of like interactive forest board thing where kids could play leaves that were in front of the music area and essentially interact with the music that was being played. So it was really about giving kids the agency to be part of the music making or part of the creation, just like the show Paper Planet does. A ridiculous calypso tropical party band, and then all the way through to interactive installations with Playable Streets. So, Playable Streets is a company that's trying to connect people through touch and create installations that is about collaborative music making, and it's also about just the physical action of touching an object, which seems really boring and sort of pedestrian, but more and more I'm finding that people's interaction with technology is through screen-based media a lot of the time, or basically it's a flat surface, or in this case a big curvy surface. And so I'm really interested in the ways that we can use technology to create a connection with the physical world and with other people. So one of the works that was actually up at the Sydney Opera House at the moment, it's called Reach Out Sounds. It's an installation where people's skin turns into the musical interface. So by someone touching one of these sound pods and someone touching another one, their skin basically creates the circuit that triggers a Raspberry Pi unit to play a series of samples or different musical notes, and then they can sort of explore within that. You can also connect through multiple people, so we have like these long chains of people creating music together. So that was a big part of the early experiments, talking about the polyglot work before, seeing kids play like their parents' nose or face or ears or mouth, which was gross. They would, I'd see this connection happening, and music was sort of a way of facilitating that connection, and it wasn't necessarily the purpose, really. It was sort of like, it was a utility to making that connection. And then another installation is called Sounding Stories, which uses conductive paint. We worked with a group of refugees from Burma, kids aged 5 to 12, and we did some workshops where we created stories together, or they rather created stories, and we took their great ideas and great images and we blew them up on this gallery wall and integrated conductive paint into them, and also recorded their stories, so you'd get this sort of cut up storybook that you walked into. We sort of thought about it like that fridge magnet poetry sort of stuff, where you've got a phrase here and there and you end up with like, you know, tennis racket, bum flinging, gyroscope helicopter or something like that. I don't know. Sounds like a good album name. So that's the gallery there. And we really found that the people who had actually created the stories had this new way of looking at them. And also people who walked into this space created their own narrative out of things that weren't necessarily there. Like here we've got sailors and one puking over the side of the boat, and like this guy in his suits being sort of knifed off into the water, and people read all sorts of great stuff into that. But I think when it was being created, it was just funny to the kids. This character, King Spicador, just came out of nowhere. Oh, and my computer's about to die. That's all right. I reckon we'll have just enough time. Yeah. So some other stuff. Have this device called Clippy, which is made out of a Kmart salad bowl and a couple of buttons. And these are magnet connectors that connect to large clips that allow people in classroom environment to turn everyday objects into musical instruments, such as a glass of water or a plant, or one kid brought in a wet shoe, which actually worked, so that was cool. The plants, which is using organic plants, we did a full series of that, but turning them into a big melodic scale. And a work I just got out of that was happening last week was the Abbotsford Convent gave me a studio and just sort of said, do whatever you like, and we threw a bunch of different ideas, you know, the classic floor piano, or one made out of water over here. There's a tub of water that people could play. And then we did a version of Reach Out Sounds there as well. Other good stuff. Before we get to that, so I'm not sure how much people want to know about the nitty-gritty of how this is put together, but essentially it's a Raspberry Pi with a whole bunch of samples, and we've designed the sound very specifically basically every iteration of this, it tries to get it more playable, more fun, and more sort of sonically interesting. We find that a lot of these installations can be very blips and blops and things like that, or sort of like Eno-esque sort of soundscapes, which are beautiful, but we're sort of interested in ways that you get an immediate response from the instrument, whatever that happens to be, plants or shoes or water. Yeah, and this is all coming out of other great stuff. So other great stuff, there's a company also called Playable City. So they're in Bristol, they're amazing. And this is a work where it records the shadows of people walking past and then replays them. Grey World, and these are tuned street railings. And I think they play The Girl from Ipanema if you walk past with a stick. Daily tous les jours, or tous les jours. This is a musical swing that creates music in the pentatonic scale. And the more people that use it, the sort of more intense the sound gets. The Urban Congo, who's sort of created these really interesting furniture things. So there's this huge movement, and I guess it's been happening for a while, but it was huge in the 90s and it sort of dropped off a little bit, of like activating streetscapes and turning the street into a sort of more playable space. So it's really interesting the way that that's sort of having a massive resurgence, and I sort of hope to be in that a bit. And these are some of the collaborators I work with. So Bill's an engineer, and he does a lot of the sort of code and stuff like that, and puts some of the tech together. Kane is a composer, so it was really important early days trying to make musical works that had sort of like a compositional structure, or sort of like a framework, essentially. She's on that. He's on that, and Eddie is an illustrator, and she sort of helped out with a bunch of the design and illustration for some of the kids' works. Okay, so I've just finished a master's in interactive touch-based musical interfaces, or whatever. You have to make it as specific as possible so you can like specialize in something. And these are sort of some of the main rules that came out of creating these works. They're all very straightforward, but I feel like working in public, you're constantly, in public spaces, you're constantly reminded of the simplicity of it, and creating works that are accessible, or playing with accessibility, which I'll talk about a bit more in a second. Control and agency, so giving others the tools to create and then stepping away is sort of like taking the artist out of it. Consistency, I mean, everyone sort of in the technology world, loves a bit of consistency when it comes to tech, but it's not always possible or not always there. My computer probably will die during this thing. And fun, and obviously it's really important to have a sense of fun, not only in the display and bringing the work out to the public, but actually creating it as well, and trying to find that spark of joy in that process. Okay. So this is what I put in my master's, and that's what I actually think. So this is like a graph made in one of those graphing things, but essentially it's the same thing. So an observer sees one of these installations, becomes a participant, and then it creates this sort of feedback loop of others seeing that participant participate, and blah, blah, blah. But in my world, it's and I actually had to draw this to actually get it out of my brain. I find that really important, is to work out the action, work out what the controller does, and then the sound, the speaker should be pointing the other direction, and then what effect this bit here has on this person here. So just constantly going back to the action, and tweaking it little bits at a time. So yeah, okay, here's a really complicated one, but it's actually pretty straightforward. So we've got this observer-participant loop, and that happens for many reasons, hopefully mostly just the work, but also friends and family bringing the observer into participation, or just curiosity, or the artist facilitator, so the way that the work is activated by other people around it, maybe people who have created it. So yeah, they're all invitations. And we also found that within these musical works, and I'm sure it's actually pretty similar for a lot of digital installations or and things like that, where you have this solo play or collaborative play, and they sometimes shift where someone collaborates and then goes solo and that sort of thing. And these are some of the observed things from that, so different playing techniques and inventing games and dance moves and all that sort of stuff. And this all came out of watching approximately 4 hours of video footage of the installation of the plants, going back, watching those 4 hours, but through the view of every single participant, so mapping each participant's interaction with the work, which I found really rewarding and boring in equal measure. It's really important to see how other people connect with your work or what you make, and how they interact with it, and how they play with it or use it in the real world. So rather than just testing it in a lab or testing it on your friends or testing it yourself, you get to see people who weren't there for that experience necessarily and how they interact with it. Iterative DIY approach. Yeah, so essentially, as you can see, or as probably becomes evident by looking at all the duct tape on here, or this really messy stuff, is that the way the Playable Streets creates works is through trial and error and testing stuff. So if you can, it's great to be able to get these objects or these artworks or whatever it is you're working on out into the public to test it, but with the aim to constantly be fixing it and recreating it. From my theatre background, I have a Beckett quote, which is basically fail again, fail better. This picture is from the first work we did, if you can call it a work, out in on Swanson Street, and it was an abject failure. It was the worst. It just like did not work at all. All this wiring was actually all connected to these metallic areas here, skater prevention spots that we'd actually wired up to be played, but it didn't work. You know, we had all these problems that we found out because we only got to go into the actual space 2 hours before we opened. But we had these 4 plants and they worked and people came and played and we're like, okay, well maybe we'll just like go down that area a little bit, and yeah, just sort of was born out of that. But I think that early failure and the still pretty constant ones that we come up against are constantly sort of like, you know, tapping us into the right direction, hopefully. And also participants showing us the way, watching people interact with the work and just going with their instincts. Sometimes yours aren't the best, potentially. Right, so all this stuff works with touch, and it all comes off of the same technology. It's capacitive touch or resistive touch, and we all have a really strong relationship with that because of our touch screens and maybe gestural stuff and things like that, the way that we interact with computers and technology. But I think the future of technology will be a bit more real-worldy. It will be a bit more sort of integrated. I mean, obviously it's already integrated in a lot of things, but we always seem to go back to these rectangular black boxes for some reason. And it would be great to sort of move out of that. And there was this, I've been reading this book about touch at the moment as one of our senses. And the researcher found that studying people who would basically, you would ask them the question, if you were to lose one sense, if you were to only have one sense, what would you keep? And a lot of people say, like sight or, taste or hearing or all these sort of things that are very, very important to us. But they actually found that pretty much no one said the sense of touch, which is really fascinating. And one of the conclusions was that people said that because people don't know what it's like not to have it. You can close your eyes, you can plug your ears, you can not eat a hamburger, and you can find out that, what it would be like. But it's really hard to imagine a world without touch. The other thing that was in this book, which is fascinating, is that he was saying how simple putting your hand in your pocket and pulling a coin out is for a human being. But for a robot, that's really hard, putting a hand in a really dark pocket, trying to discern a bottle cap from a coin is really, really tricky because it hasn't got the sense of touch. It would usually rely on motion sensors or infrared or cameras or something like that. So that world is sort of way in the future, but I'm sort of fascinated to see where that all ends up. That's not really anything, that's just me just interested in it. And that's pretty much it. If you want to find out more, you can go here. And if you're interested in collaborating or doing anything like that, let me know. And if you've got any questions now, if you want to shoot anything towards me, more specific stuff or less specific. Yeah?
So one of the main areas you came up with was the accessibility.
Yeah.
What do you find the differences between projects that are for children and for adults? I guess that kids tend to be more open to just playing with things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there'd be other difficulties.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. And I do come from, I guess, working with Polyglot Theatre for 10 years, they're a kids company. Don't necessarily see Playable Streets as that, but we do work in that space. And yeah, kids do really play and get involved. And they're also great instigators for getting adults involved, which I found out through that. But I think when designing stuff, I think it's always good to think about access for all, like for everybody. And because ultimately you're going to have more people then interact with your work and take some joy out of it. The other thing which I found really interesting as well was like restricting access and what that does. So by creating some of the installations quite high, we'd have parents engaging by lifting their children and basically using their kids to like play the instrument, just like drag them along the plants and that sort of stuff. And so we found out that actually taking access away creates this way of playing. So with reach out sounds, the pods are so far apart that one person can't play them, basically. And that was really important because that means that people have to connect to play. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you had much to do with the lifelong kindergarten?
Lifelong kindergarten?
The makey guys?
Oh yeah. Well, it definitely a lot of my sort of fascination came out from Berlin. Is that his last name? I can't remember. The guy who created it. So I use Makey that sort of reach out one, and yeah, I don't know the.
Oh, so the lifelong kindergarten is part of the IT media lab.
Oh right. Okay.
Guys who do grad school.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, worth checking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we couldn't hear any sounds from your installations in your presentation, so I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the way that you approach the sound design. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we do have a. Let's see if I can get one going. Okay. This is. Oh, okay. So we've got these few different sounds. It's hard with only 2 contacts at the moment, but we also have. So we have like 2 ways of thinking about sound, I think, and one is basically creating instruments, so samplers essentially, where people interact with them, and the interface is just different every time, like plants or the wall or whatever. And then we have narrative, so we use it to actually present words, text, emotive music, things like that, to create music, to create sort of an environment. Yeah, so they're the sort of 2 ways I guess we look at it. And the composer basically goes in, looks at the space, sort of assesses the ambience in the space, and then works from that backwards. Yeah.
How did Playable Streets start? What brought you to this field of interaction design?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I was doing theatre for like 12 years, and I was definitely not in the tech world at all. Came to it very late. We started in 2016, and that, there we go. And that came out of looking at YouTube videos, actually, and seeing this stuff like the making and things like that. I was going, whoa, what if you could just like wire up? I was drunk. I was at a pub, and I was like, what if you wire up this beer or this table or this street where we're out here, and like, what if you could make music just on the street and other people could come and play? And it sort of came from that, and I kept watching these YouTube videos. I was like, oh my god, it's just like I'm like 5 years too late to this party. It's like 2016, and that was really important, because for a long time, for like 6 months, I thought, there's no way I can do this, because everyone's going to go, well, yeah, duh, like everyone's doing this stuff. It's like done. And what I found was through doing it and through doing the first one was that I could potentially bring something different to it, which was my performative background. And so bring the play and the sort of like irreverence and silliness sort of to that technology. And also, besides some of those examples I showed, found that a lot of people were doing these experiments at home, but not bringing them out to like outside of their garage or outside of their house. And that was sort of empowering, I suppose, to feel like you could just go out and play with it. And also I had a few, so a lot of this work also, I should say, comes from cold emailing people. So I'd like just email and go, oh, I've got this idea to sort of like wire up a street. Do you have any money? And that's paraphrasing a little bit, but not really. And they go, oh yeah, well, you know, what are you thinking? And I'm like, a few thousand? Is that a lot? And through that, I sort of like got these really great people to sort of support this thing, and they were totally on board with the idea of testing it out in public. So the Sounding Stories and a few other installations I've done the gallery, they gave me the gallery for a month, and I started, and it sort of broke, fixed it, and didn't work. Then just wrestling with it until it was a work, and then they were like, okay, cool, as long as it gets there by the end. So I think it's really important to remember is that you're always bringing yourself to anything you create, and that's the uniqueness of the thing, which took me ages to work out. And yep.
What is the most challenging part in this process? Is it the technical problem you mentioned before, like creating all the interactives? What is the thing you find most difficult?
I think the thing that is most difficult, to be completely honest, is feeling like you've created something that's just crap. Like, you know, like putting it out there and going, oh, this is not good. This is not good. And then needing a few other people to come and fix it or play with it and seeing, oh, what they're doing with it is good. I might just change it a little bit and get to that. Okay. The tech stuff is hard. You know, a lot of late nights, because I'm not a tech person, a lot of late nights of like you Googling how to like, you know, change the audio driver on a Raspberry Pi using Linux, which I've never done before. But I think that's the hardest thing, is like putting it in public and seeing people break it, and realizing that you should have thought of that before. Yeah.
So you sort of said that you sort of cold emailed people at the start.
Yeah.
So now do you see that like the Abbotsford Common one, they sort of approach you? So is that right?
Yeah.
So is it more working the other way now that your sort of name's out there? You're seeing that you get a lot of people.
A bit of both. Like, so on the practical side of things, like, so every now and then I might get an email in my inbox, but that's one in for every like 15 out. Okay. And it's like the Sydney Opera House one that's in there for 2 weeks now. That was just like, okay, I'm going to go to Sydney and just like have 10 meetings with people and say, this is. I wrote a phrase for this, and it sounds really bad, but this is what I was thinking. It's like tech solutions for problems you don't have, and that's really hard to sell, right? So like here, I've got this bit of technology, and I can create this thing. You don't necessarily need it or want it, but here is why you should. And so that was a big turning point to work out how to articulate why it's not actually about the technology, it's about people playing in your space and recontextualizing your space and seeing it as a bit more fun. Yeah. But yeah, definitely cold emails.
Yeah. And
just remember to change the name of the person you're really important. Anything else?
Does everyone want to join me in thanking Glen for his time today?
Thank you very much.